Great White Fire of 2003. Most of you probably remember this one, and if you don't, then your parents do. In 2003, one of the worst fires in modern times took place at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island.
I can see where this is going.
462 people had crammed into the 400-capacity nightclub to see the ancient rock band Great White perform, which actually wasn't the original.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it right here and just get over this point really quickly. And that is that venue capacities are super important to the safety of an event and for a venue. When we talk about venue capacities, they're sort of determined by a few factors. The first is obviously how many entrances and exits there are in the venue. And this also comes into play is how accessible those entrances and exits are in terms of the location of where they are. So if you have all the exits at one end of the venue, then there's no way for the people at the back of the venue to get out. So that will play into the decision-making process of how many people are allowed in the venue. Obviously, the next is how big the venue is physically, the area space, the floor space, the square meterage. And then they'll look at the structural integrity of the venue as well. So if it's a very old venue, a heritage-listed venue, they may make decisions based on that. And in very small cases, I know this has been a case in a few venues back home, back in Australia, where they've looked at how many toilets there are in a venue, because they're not just looking at the structural integrity of the venue and how many people can fit in a physical space, but also how many people can be in said space and this space support them in a sort of a health and safety way. So like if you've got 1,000 people and you've only got two toilets for the 1,000 people, then obviously that venue is not going to be able to support, the amount of people that will need to use bathrooms. That's a very small, minute point. The main points are obviously the exits and entrances, the accessibility and access to those entrances and exits, and also the square meterage of the venue are the two main ones that determine how many people are allowed in the venue. When you go over these amounts and these capacities, which you can, usually fit another 100 or 200 people in a venue. You can go over these, but it is illegal. You go over a venue capacity amount and you are breaking your regulations with your local state or your local authority. And of course, you're putting people at risk in the case of an emergency, which, as most venues will say, you can't predict when there's going to be a fire or when you need to evacuate a venue. You might even have to evacuate a venue just because the smoke machine set off a fire alarm, which I have done many times. That's obviously a stress test, but you never want to find out the worst way, which is when people lose their lives or get injured because they're trying to get out of a venue and they can't.
Band. It was the singer Jack Russell and his solo band, along with original guitarist Mark Kendall, the stumbling remnants of an 80s one-hit wonder. When the band launched into their first song, their tour manager activated pyrotechnic flares they'd been using throughout the tour, one facing straight up and one aimed off to each side of the stage. What the band didn't know was that the Station nightclub's walls and ceiling had been insulated with polyurethane foam to soundproof the venue, which is very cheap and extremely flammable. Within 9 seconds of the pyrotechnic's ignition, small flames could be seen above the stage. The band continued to play for another 26 seconds.
26 seconds they continued to play for. The band just goes, wow.
The fire alarm sprang and fans rushed for the exit. But only 1 minute after the pyros had been set off, the venue was filled with thick smoke and pitched into darkness. Over 400 people were now blind, choking, and heading to the only exit they knew of. Some people were trampled and crushed in panic. Some blindly found their way to a door hoping it was an exit, only to end up trapped in one of the bathrooms. The exit everyone knew of became another meat grinder situation as people fell and got stuck among everyone else trying to escape. Apparently there was a backstage exit the band had used to quickly get out, but two bouncers insisted that it was only to be used by the band and prevented multiple people from escaping that way. Man,
stupid.
I hope they died. Only 6 minutes after.
Okay, let's break this down. So, with this particular tragedy, obviously, the first and foremost, I'll point out the obvious. No security guard should be stopping people to exit a burning, bloody building. That is stupid. Most security won't do that. They'll just let them exit however they can, get out however they can. That's really stupid. In this particular situation, I can actually offer some more insight for, because I've actually done a couple firefighting courses. And these courses were done at the premises, and I did train with fireys. So with these type of fires, when you have products that have a lot of petroleum and oil in them, like polyethylene or anything like that, they're obviously going to cause a lot of black, thick smoke, which with most fires, it's no secret that the majority of people who die in fires don't die because it is, it's a flame and they die because of heat. It's actually because of smoke inhalation, and then they get consumed by the fires. So smoke inhalation is a very big risk when we are having fires and people are trapped inside, and it's thick back smoke created by burning of oil and plastic. So when we have this type of fire, the first and foremost is to get people outside, obviously, escape the fire. But when we go back to what I was saying before about the venue capacities, this is where the venue capacity rule kicks in, because not only do you have a fire and you have an emergency situation, you also have a situation where people can't get out because they don't know where the exits are. And I'll come back to that in a sec. So when you've got so many people trying to get out at once, you just don't have the actual physical space to get people out in a timely manner. The fact that it took 26... What also annoys me is it took 26 seconds for the band to stop playing, even though there's a fire. Now, there's a lot of crew that go into playing with bands, and they would have had people backstage. I'm really surprised that no one went up to the band and stopped the band from playing. And any production manager, tour manager would stop the act and go, oh shit, stop. We got a fire. We need to stop. So that was really surprising. Obviously, with this particular incident, with the venue capacity, they only counted on those 2 emergency exits being used. Now, when one's being blocked by security and you've only got one exit, people are obviously looking for other exits. And sometimes in events, we do have to block exits. That is a thing. We do block exits sometimes. We put a drape when we want to close off a side of the room, which is not in use, make the venue more intimate. So we'll use drapes, or we'll just block an exit for whatever reason. We'll put a board up or whatever, or we'll put some sort of set piece up so especially when it's for people coming in and out of back of house. But when we do this, what we do is we put a little LED sign in the front of where that blockage is, so people still know that that is an emergency exit. The emergency exits we never actually block completely. We'll usually just put something a meter or 2 in front of it, just so people don't see the exit and people walking in and out of an exit. Say, for instance, in a corporate event and at an award show, at a ceremony, at a conference, usually sometimes they'll put a board up so you can't see into the kitchen. But if that's an emergency exit, they'll have a sign on the other side so you can still see that it is an emergency exit. But in this particular scenario, obviously people didn't know where the exits are, and that's why venue capacities are super important.
After the ignition started, the entire club was engulfed in flames and 100 people were dead. Most piled together at the exit, unable to escape. One of the dead was Jack Russell's guitarist Ty Longley, who had initially escaped the venue unharmed but had went back in to try to save his guitar. None of the deceased could have possibly known that the venue had been
Straight up, no guitar is ever worth your life. Never go back into a burning building for a guitar. That's very unfortunate, but yeah, never do that. Don't run into a burning building for a guitar. I don't care how rare and classic it is.
a death trap waiting to happen. Aside from it being stuffed full of flammable foam, the venue also had no sprinklers, and the fire alarm that was going off wasn't actually connected to the local fire department. Why don't you just coat the venue in gasoline while you're at it? Most people...
Yep, so sprinkler systems are a legal requirement now for most venues, if not all venues. Pretty much all venues will have a sprinkler system of some sort. There's two types of smoke alarms for most venues, especially nightlife venues. The first is a heat-based fire alarm, and the other one's a smoke-based fire alarm. Some venues use heat, some venues use smoke, some use a different type of smoke alarm which doesn't get set off by hazers, and smoke machines, which is, most smoke machines and hazers, the compounds for that is just basically water and a little bit of chemicals. They're not actual... it's not actual smoke. There's not someone there with some sort of big fan just flaming a fire, hoping that smoke goes in the room. But it is there's usually two types of fire alarms, smoke and heat. But if the fact that they had no system that's connected to the fire department, that's pretty major. Most are nowadays, to be honest. And I've triggered the fire alarms at many venues because I've pumped too much smoke into a venue. So... yeah, I've done that a few times.
Ended up dying of asphyxiation from toxic fumes in the air that killed them quickly, which, to be brutally honest, is a lot better than burning alive. Another 230 people were injured but survived, and the fire was the worst fireworks accident in U.S. history. Governing boards across the world became strict on seemingly no-shit safety policies for venues, including requiring sprinkler systems and no pyro in small clubs.
You can have pyro in small clubs. You can use cold sparks, which don't give off a great amount of heat, but there is obviously still the risk of things catching alight. So having fire retardant drapes is a good start if you have drapes on stage. Advancing the show properly, like advancing, when we talk about advancing, we're talking about that pre-production before the show goes in, talking to the in-house production manager and saying like, hey, look, is this going to be safe to activate in your venue? We don't usually use fireworks in a venue because fireworks give off heat and who wants to set off a firework inside? But cold sparks are commonly used in indoor venues and venues like this with low ceilings. I have used them a great over many times, and they do present their own risks. But you don't need a pyro license for cold sparks machines because they don't. There is more risk from other things in venues than cold sparks.
Jack Russell's tour manager pleaded guilty to 100 counts of involuntary manslaughter and served half of a 4-year prison sentence until family members of the victims petitioned for his release, saying he was the only one who had always shown responsibility and remorse for his part in the accident. The venue's owner, Michael, was given the same prison sentence, but did get released a couple months early for good behavior, and his brother and co-owner, Jeffrey, only received 500 hours of community service. The venue was completely destroyed that night, and
that's unfortunate. I think the venue owners should have got a much harder sentence because at the end of the day, they are responsible for the safety of the patrons, not so much the tour manager. The tour manager's not there to sell tickets. The tour manager there is to manage the tour. They are there to plan the tour out. I mean, you can say from a certain perspective that they're the ones who set off the fireworks, so they're the ones he was the one who was ultimately responsible. But I would argue that it's the venue owners that put in very cheap materials that basically caused a fire, and they pushed too many people and they sold too many tickets and they pushed too many people inside the venue. I think that the lack of training of security staff is also on the venue side. So I think they should have got a lot more. Obviously I'm not a judge, but I would love to give them 10 years at least for the amount of deaths that happened because they got greedy. And they sold too many tickets. They were trying to make too much money, and it cost people their lives.
And has since been turned into a memorial for the victims. Number 6, Collective Fire 2015. This story is very similar to the Jack Russell fire I just talked about, but this one is even crazier and has so many plot twists it could be an HBO miniseries. Romania 2015. The metalcore band Goodbye to Gravity were performing a free concert at the Collective nightclub to celebrate their new album, where they promoted that they were going to be using lighting and pyrotechnics to, quote, give life to the science fiction artwork of the new album. Unfortunately, this venue was also stuffed full of flammable toxic foam, and you can probably figure out what happened. The venue was engulfed in flames and toxic smoke, and 26 people were killed at the scene, including the entire band except for the singer, who himself was critically injured. But see, that's just the pilot episode. Here's where this HBO series really gets going. About 200 survivors of the fire were transported to hospitals throughout the country, but while they were in treatment, many ended up getting worse, with some developing infections in their wounds. Less than a month after surviving the initial fire, another 38 people died in the hospitals.
I'm just skipping a bit of this video because it's not relevant to events. So this particular incident, again, same thing. You're using cheap materials. I mean, Romania, I don't know Romanian laws, but Eastern European, I have worked in Eastern Europe before, and the laws and regulations around certain things are not as strict and as in Western society, especially around safety in the events industry. And I've worked on some very unsafe stages, and it's nowhere near as at the same level as Western events and Western regulations.